Hi guys, so today's video is a tutorial for National 5 Fashion and Textiles, and today we're going to look at some embroidery stitches. So I'm going to cover 5 stitches with you today, so not to overload you with lots of information, and the ones that I thought we'll cover, we'll do a running stitch, which is a fairly simple one, a back stitch, a chain stitch, a French knot and a herringbone stitch. Okay, let's get started. Alright guys, so I'm going to run through some of the equipment that you might need if you were to do your embroidery at home. So first of all, I've got my square of cotton. So this is just a plain, simple cotton weave. I definitely would not suggest using anything stretchy for embroidery. You want something that's quite rigid. I've also got my embroidery threads. I've only got these colours at home just now, but you can get a whole selection, maybe ones with different colour gradients. You can get metallic ones if you chose. I've got a ruler here because I'm going to draw on my lines to make sure that my embroidery stitches are neat and precise. If you go freehand, then you can start to lose your way a little bit. Tailor chalk. Now white is not going to work on white, so I've picked up a yellow chalk and I've sharpened it off here as well, and I've also got a chalk pencil. You can also use what's called an air erase or a heat erase pen or pencil as well. So you can buy these from specific dealers, and they'll wear off in time, or as you wash them, the mark that you make with the pen would wash off. I've got my snips here, and I've also got quite a wide-eyed needle. I'm not too sure if you can see how wide that is, but the reason we need that is our embroidery thread is extremely thick. There's actually, if I pull this apart, 6 strands of thread on this embroidery thread. You can work with less than 6 if you wished. You could peel some off and work with just 1 or 2 or 4 or the full 6 if you want. I'm going to work with 6 threads on my thread today, so I'm going to use quite a wide-eyed needle for that. Okay, and I've also picked up an embroidery hoop. This one, although it's got the wood effect, actually it's flexible, and I picked that up on Amazon. If you don't have one of these at home, that's absolutely fine. You don't need them. It does just make the process a little easier. Alright, so I want to give you a quick wee example of something that you could create. Now, this was something that I worked on years ago. Me and my gran worked on it when I was about 11, and we didn't freehand draw any of this design, so we didn't use our pencils or our chalk for any of these. We used something like this, a template or transfer that you would iron onto your fabric that gives you the impression that you then fill out. So that's also an option for you as well. You could buy transfers. This is a dated one. This has come from my grand's collection of her sewing box. So you could find some more modern, up-to-date versions. But on here, there's a few examples of some of the stitches that you could be doing. Okay, so in these flowers here, you can see that there's been a bit of filling done. This is called a satin stitch, but we'll not cover that today. We can do this in another tutorial. Over on these types of flower petals, this is your chain stitch. You can see this again more clearly perhaps on these taller flower designs. Okay, so your chain stitch creates these stitches, and then here these are your French knots, which we'll do today as well. Right guys, so I'm going to get started, and the first thing you can see that I've done here is I've drawn on a series of lines and markings for my stitches to follow. That will be a lot easier for me to create a nice straight row of stitches for this example for you. Okay, so now that I've done that, I've got my embroidery hoop here, which I'm going to take apart and place the fabric over the inner circle, and then this is going to take a little bit of force. I think I'm going to push this down over the inner piece. There we go, and that stretches the fabric nice and taut into the hoop, so I can now follow these lines without the fabric puckering. Alright, so what I'm going to do first of all with my thread is I'm going to tie a knot in the end here. So simply all I'm going to do is wrap that around my finger and tuck the tail through the loop and pull can slide that knot down just a little. Okay, and that will prevent my thread from coming through the end, through the fabric as I'm sewing. And I'll just trim those ends off there. Okay, so now the next thing I want to do is thread the other end of the thread through the eye of the needle. Now I see a lot of students struggling to do this. The main problem I see is that their thread has not been cut sharp. So using a sharp pair of scissors, remove any fluffy tails of thread on the fabric, on the thread, sorry. The other problem is that they're holding it far too far down and they've got no control over that thread as they try to push it through the needle. So my top tip is to hold the thread as close to the end as you possibly can, and then it's more a case of lowering the needle onto the thread like that. Okay, and then you can pull it through. Again, I see a few pupils when they've threaded their needle, they tie the knots, they tie the threads together, okay? And that means that my needle is never going to be able to move up and down the length of the thread, okay? You need the thread to be able to move through the needle so you can adjust the length. And that will become clear as we go. So only a knot in the end of one end of your thread and a nice clean cut end of thread, and you're holding that close as you thread the needle onto the thread there. Okay, so I'm going to start now with our running stitch. So what I'm doing is I'm going to start from the back of the hoop here, okay, and I'm going to need to position the needle at the end of my marked line. You can see there that I wasn't too clear on where my needle was, so just feel around. I'm holding the needle very close to the end there and positioning. Once I'm happy with the position of that needle and I've hit the line, then I can bring my hand around to the front and pull the thread through. Okay, now a running stitch is a series of perforated lines. Okay, so you're not looking for a solid row of stitching here. I would be stitching about 1 centimetre, pull the thread through, make sure it's nice and tight, and then leave a small gap and again create your centimetre long stitch. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing is I'm creating similar length stitches with a small gap in between the two for your running stitch. Okay, if you find that your thread isn't behaving the way you want it to, then don't worry, just you can pull it out, tease it through and control the thread, make it do what you want it to do. Okay, and I would continue that up to my line, up to my line's finished, and then I'm going to show you how to do a back stitch. Okay, and there you have your first embroidery running stitch. So very similar to the running stitch, but this time we're filling in the blanks. So once again I'm trying to find my beginning point through the back of the fabric. Taking about 1 centimetre long stitch, and then this time taking a wider gap, but I am now coming in to the point where the last stitch finished. So you can see what's happening as I'm going back on myself. So the needle is again coming out the fabric about 1 centimetre away from the last stitch, and you create the stitch backwards by filling in the blank. The key here is consistency, making sure that your stitches are the same size. If it helps you when you're first learning, then possibly you want to mark each point, so maybe a centimetre dot along the line so that you know where it is you're coming to and from. This stitch could be helpful if you're doing any lettering, any outlines of a design, that sort of thing. You can see my needle trying to find the right spot there. And then back in. And I'll just finish off on that small stitch there. Now you can see here my two threads have been caught through, okay, through the back. So if I turn that over, you can see I've just eased that through. But this is where I want to shorten the length of my tail so this tail does not get caught into the fabric, okay, and so I can now pull the needle up and have a shorter tail. That's why it's important not to tie your two ends of thread together. Okay, so here we have our running stitch and now our back stitch, and you can see the difference between the two. Right guys, so now I'm going to show you how to do a chain stitch. So slightly different and a little bit more complex than your running stitch or your back stitch. Right, I'll show you how we're going to get started with this. First of all, again, I'm finding the spot where I want my needle to come through to the front. And now I'm going to put the needle in just beside where it came out. And I'm not going to pull the thread all the way through. I'm going to leave a small loop of thread. And that loop is going to sit over the needle and the new thread coming out, okay, like that. So what I'm going to do now though to create the chain, the reason it's called a chain is that if one isn't secured properly, then it will start, the whole chain will start to unravel. So now what I'm going to do is put my needle back in through this loop, and again right beside where it came out. So we're creating the same stitch over and over again, and this time loop my thread around the needle, so I'm creating another link in the chain. Okay, can we all see how that's happening? And you can neaten these stitches off individually, one at a time. Okay, so again, put the needle in through the loop, back where the needle came out, make sure the stitch is about the same length, wrap the thread around the needle to create another link in the chain, like so. Okay, and we're just going to continue this process all the way up the line. This takes a little bit more concentration, guys, and a lot more patience. when you were to finish this off at the end, then obviously you wouldn't put your needle back through the link in the chain. You would bring your thread and needle over the other side to secure it. But we're not there yet. Okay, now I've just pulled my thread too tight there, and you can see that my fabric's starting to pucker, so I'm going to ease that up a little bit. I don't want that pull in my fabric. Okay, and last stitch. So now to secure this last link in the chain, I'm going to go over to the outside of where that thread is coming and secure that in place there. So now I've got my chain stitch. Alright guys, so now we are going to do our series of French knots here. These are very small stitches. Again, I've got my knot at the end of the thread, and from the back I'm going to place the needle in the position and now what I want to do is take a very small stitch like that and wrap the thread around the needle just once, pull the thread through, and then we're going to anchor that by putting the needle through to the back. Oops. There we go, and that's our French knot. So again, needle up to the front, put the needle in, and really I'm just talking a couple of yarns off your fabric there, okay? Wrap the thread around the needle in a loop just the once, and then you can pull your thread all the way through this loop that you've created. And anchor your stitch. You can see that's starting to twist, so I'm just going to try and help tease that through. You have to remember you're working with 6 threads at this time, so sometimes they don't all want to behave the way they should. Okay, and then the last one. You can see what I'm doing there is I'm using my thumb and my nail to make sure all the threads are going where I want them to. Okay, and there we have our series of French knots. Alright guys, so the last stitch I'm going to show you today is the herringbone stitch. Again, a little more complicated, and as with all of them, it's about accuracy and the fine detail. Right, so starting, what you can see here is I've drawn two parallel lines, and I'm going to start off at the corner of one, there. Now this is a bit of a zigzag between the two, but we're creating very small crosses on this side, well, on both sides really. Okay, so the needle goes in, and then on the same side that it went into the fabric, it's coming out like this, and then we're going to cross over like this. So it's made a small cross here. Now we want to do the same on the other side, so my thread comes back on itself along this line. Okay, and then up to the other side. And again, back on itself along this line and cross over. So once you reach the other side, you take a small step back and then cross over to the other side. Small step back and cross. Alright guys, so quick recap there of all the skills we've just covered is you've just been shown how to do your running stitch with the small gaps in between, your back stitch which fills in those gaps, your chain stitch which if you don't secure each link in the chain it would unravel, your French knots and your herringbone stitch. Okay. Alright guys, so that is your 5 simple embroidery stitches for you to get practicing with at home. So remember we've just covered our running stitch, our back stitch, our French knot, chain stitch and a herringbone stitch. Okay, let me know how you get on. Remember to like and subscribe and leave any feedback. Thanks guys, see you soon, bye.